The giant metal warrior stood 14 feet tall in the center of the diplomatic chamber. Its surface gleamed under the soft blue lights. Every alien diplomat in the room watched with pride as the robot demonstrated a series of combat moves, each one perfect and precise. Commander Eli Wright of Earth's First Contact Division tried not to look impressed, but he couldn't help himself. The machine moved faster than his eyes could track. Its weapon systems deployed and retracted in microseconds. The robot finished its demonstration by splitting into 4 smaller units, each one capable of independent action. "This is our newest combat proxy," said Ambassador Kreeltav, the insectoid diplomat representing the Harmonious Confederation. His mandibles clicked with pride. The ZX-9000 series can adapt to 18 different planetary environments without modification. Eli nodded politely. He had been on this space station for 3 weeks now, learning about the Galactic Concordat and its 27 member species. Earth had only been invited to join after humans proved they could travel faster than light. "Very impressive technology," Eli said. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and short brown hair. His blue uniform felt tight under his arms. "How many of these units can you field at once?" "For a standard planetary defense, we deploy approximately 20,000 units," Kreeltav said. His compound eyes reflected the light in purple patterns. "For major conflicts, the Concordat can mobilize up to 15 million combat proxies across multiple systems." Several other diplomats moved closer to join the conversation. There was Zanvri, whose body looked like blue glass with tentacles flowing from its base. Beside her stood Zolak, who resembled a tall, thin praying mantis with silver skin. The third alien was Pelvor, who had 6 limbs and a body covered in soft green fur. "Our species contributes the targeting systems," said Zolak proudly. "They can identify and neutralize threats from up to 8 kilometers away, even through heavy atmospheric distortion." "And my people provide the neural networks," added Pelvor. "The decision matrices can process combat scenarios at a rate of 900,000 per second." Eli nodded again, trying to look suitably impressed. In truth, he was impressed. Earth had nothing like these machines. "Tell me, Commander Wright," said Zanvri, her voice sounding like wind chimes. "What combat proxies does Earth deploy? We are most curious about human military technology." Eli cleared his throat. He knew this moment would come eventually. "Well, we have drones and some automated tanks, some robotic mine-clearing units. But for the most part, humans don't use combat proxies the way you do." The diplomatic chamber went completely silent. Every alien diplomat turned to stare at him. "I don't understand," said Kreeltav slowly. "If you don't use combat proxies, then how do you conduct warfare?" Eli shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "We send soldiers, humans." There was a collective gasp from the assembled diplomats. Zanvri's tentacles curled up tight against her glass-like body. Jolak's mandibles clicked rapidly, and what Eli had learned was a sign of distress. "You send actual beings into combat?" asked Pelvor. "Physical bodies? Your own species?" "Yes," said Eli. "We call them Marines, soldiers, troops. Depends on the branch of service." "But that's barbaric," exclaimed Kreeltav. "No civilized species has sent actual beings into combat for over 8,000 years, not since the Morning Wars." Eli had read about the Morning Wars in his briefing materials, a terrible conflict that had claimed billions of lives across a dozen worlds. After that devastation, the surviving species formed the Concordat and agreed that all future conflicts would be handled by machine proxies only. "I understand it seems strange to you," Eli said carefully. "But Earth developed differently. We've had to adapt to survive on our planet." "Your planet," said Zanvri. "Earth is classified as a death world, is it not? High gravity, extreme temperature variations, dangerous wildlife, and high background radiation?" "That's correct," said Eli. "Earth shaped us to be tough." "Still," said Jolak, "to risk your actual physical forms in combat, it's unthinkable. What happens when your soldiers die?" "They're gone," Eli said simply. "We honor their sacrifice. But a being cannot be replaced." Kreeltav's antennae were vibrating with agitation. "A combat proxy can be rebuilt. The data core can be salvaged. Nothing is truly lost. Eli thought about how to explain. Humans believe that having something to lose makes us fight harder to protect it. We call it having skin in the game. The aliens exchanged troubled glances. Eli could see he wasn't making a good impression. Perhaps, said Pelvor gently, your species simply hasn't developed the proper technology yet. The Concordat would be happy to share our combat proxy designs with Earth. Eli smiled politely. That's very generous. I'll certainly pass that offer along to my superiors. Just then, a chime sounded through the chamber. It was time for the next diplomatic session. The aliens began to move toward the large doors at the end of the room, but they kept glancing back at Eli with expressions he interpreted as concern, fear, or fascination. As they walked, Kreeltav moved beside Eli. Commander, I hope you don't take offense at our reaction. It's just that the concept of risking actual life forms in battle is quite shocking to us. No offense taken, Eli assured him. Different worlds, different solutions. Indeed, said the insectoid diplomat. Though I must say, if humans are willing to fight with their bare hands, I wonder what else you might be capable of. They entered the Grand Council chamber where representatives from all Concordat species were gathering. Eli could feel eyes on him from every direction. News traveled fast in diplomatic circles. By now, everyone had heard about the strange humans, who fought their own battles. Commander Wright, said a voice behind him. He turned to see Admiral Vreen, a tall amphibian-like being with pale blue skin. Is it true that humans willingly enter combat zones themselves? Yes, Admiral, said Eli. We've been doing it for our entire history. The Admiral's large eyes blinked slowly. Fascinating. Disturbing, but fascinating. I would be interested in learning more about human military doctrine. I'd be happy to share what I can, Eli replied. As the council session began, Eli noticed how the other diplomats kept stealing glances at the human delegation. He'd expected some surprise at humanity's different approach to warfare, but not this level of shock. What Eli didn't know was that across the Concordat, reports were already spreading about the Deathworlders who fought with their bare hands. Some species were horrified, others intrigued, but all of them recognized that something new had entered the galactic community, something unpredictable and potentially dangerous. And in the darkness between the stars, the Hive sovereignty was also receiving these reports. They had been planning their attack on the Concordat for decades, carefully analyzing the predictable patterns of robotic warfare. Now they would need to consider this new variable, humans who fought not like machines, but like the survivors of a harsh evolutionary crucible. Lisa Martinez stepped onto the raised platform in the center of the Concordat Security Council chamber. All around her, the curved walls rose up like a bowl, lined with representatives from 27 different species. Their eyes, optical, sensors, and various sensing organs were all fixed on her. Lisa wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Her black hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she stood straight-backed and confident despite the tension in the room. As the human military liaison to the Council, it was her job to explain humanity's approach to warfare. Thank you for this opportunity to address the Council, Lisa began. Her voice carried through the chamber thanks to the translator units that converted her words to each species' preferred communication method. I understand there are concerns about human military practices. Concerns is an understatement, said Counselor Zanvri. The translucent being's tentacles rippled with obvious distress. We have reviewed the information provided by Commander A. Right, and it is deeply troubling. You mean to tell us that your soldiers physically enter combat zones, with only primitive armor to protect your soft tissues? Lisa nodded. That's correct, Counselor. We call them Marines, infantry, soldiers. The name depends on which branch of service they belong to. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. Some leaned forward in fascination. Others recoiled in what appeared to be disgust or fear. But why risk your actual bodies? Asked Counselor Zolak, the silver mantis-like being. Is your AI technology so underdeveloped? The Concordat would be willing to share our combat proxy designs. Lisa smiled politely. That's a generous offer, Counselor. But our robotics are quite advanced in many areas. We simply found that humans perform better in unpredictable situations. There's something about human intuition and adaptability that our best AIs can't match. Even at the cost of lives? Asked another counselor, a being that resembled a floating cloud of purple gas contained within a translucent sphere. We don't view it as a cost, Lisa explained. We see it as necessity. Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us at every turn. We survived because we adapted, because we were willing to put ourselves at risk to protect what matters. The council chamber erupted in murmurs again. Lisa stood patiently, waiting for them to settle down. Admiral Vreen, the tall amphibian with pale blue skin, raised a webbed hand. I have studied your military history, Lieutenant Martinez. Your species has engaged in combat for thousands of years, often with extreme casualties. That's correct, Admiral, Lisa said. And yet you continued to fight yourselves? Even knowing the cost? The Admiral seemed genuinely puzzled. Humans fight for many reasons, Lisa explained. For resources, for territory, for beliefs. But most often we fight to protect others, our families, our communities, our way of life. A small being with 6 eyes and golden fur stood up. I am Counselor Trell Knox of the Fury Collective. May I ask a direct question? Lisa nodded. Our analysis suggests that human soldiers have a relatively high survival rate in modern conflicts, but those who do survive often suffer from something called post-traumatic stress. If your bodies survive but your minds are damaged, doesn't this defeat the purpose of sending biological beings into combat? The question caught Lisa off guard. She took a moment before answering. Counselor, humans are complex beings. Yes, combat can leave scars, both physical and mental. But those who serve understand the risks, and many find that facing danger together creates bonds stronger than anything else. We call it brotherhood, or sisterhood. It's a connection that runs deeper than blood. Fascinating, said Counselor Trellnox, all 6 eyes blinking in sequence. So there are psychological benefits to your approach as well. There's something else, Lisa added. When humans know that real lives are at stake, their own and others, they fight differently. They push beyond normal limits. They find solutions no algorithm would consider. From the back of the chamber, a deep voice rumbled. It belonged to Grand Marshal Krev, a massive being with gray stone-like skin and glowing red eyes. The Grand Marshal rarely spoke at council meetings. I have reviewed the combat footage provided by Earth, said the deep voice. These humans fight with unpredictable tactics. They take risks no sensible combat proxy would consider. They adapt to changing conditions faster than any algorithmic response matrix. The council fell silent, waiting for the Grand Marshal's conclusion. It is primitive, Krev continued, but potentially effective against enemies who have only ever faced our predictable combat proxies. A chill ran through the chamber. No one spoke for several moments. Are you suggesting, Counselor Zanvri finally said, that we should adopt human methods? Send our own people to die in battle? Certainly not, the Grand Marshal rumbled. But perhaps there are lessons to be learned from these Deathworlders. Lisa watched the exchange with interest. She hadn't expected any member of the council to see potential value in human combat methods. If I may, she said, Earth doesn't expect the Concordat to change its ways. We respect your commitment to preserving life. We're simply asking for understanding that our approach is different. Admiral Vreen nodded slowly. Lieutenant Martinez, would humans be willing to share more detailed information about your combat training methods? Purely for academic study, of course. I believe that could be arranged, Admiral, Lisa replied. As the session continued, more questions came from all corners of the chamber. Some counselors wanted to know about human weaponry. Others were curious about training techniques. A few even asked about the psychological preparation that allowed humans to face death directly. Lisa answered each question as clearly as she could, aware that she was shaping the Concordat's first impression of humanity as a military power. What? None of them knew was that far away. At the edge of Concordat space, sensors were detecting unusual movements. The Hive sovereignty, a collective consciousness spanning 3 star systems, had begun positioning its advanced combat proxies for a surprise attack. The Hive had spent decades studying concordant defense patterns, analyzing the predictable algorithms that guided their combat proxies. They had developed countermeasures for every standard tactic in the concordant playbook, but they had never encountered humans before. They had no data on how these biological warriors would respond to threats. No way to predict what these Deathworlders might do when cornered. As Lisa finished her presentation to the council, an emergency signal flashed on several counselors' communication devices. Admiral Vreen looked down at his device, then back up, at Lisa with his large amphibian eyes now wide with alarm. "It seems," the Admiral said quietly, "that we may soon have a practical demonstration of human combat capabilities. We have reports of Hive sovereignty ships moving into position near the colony world of New Harmony." Lisa's expression turned serious. "Admiral, if the Concordant requests assistance, Earth stands ready to help." The chamber fell silent once more as the counselors looked at each other. They had just been expressing horror at the idea of beings fighting their own battles. Now they faced the prospect of needing exactly that kind of help. The emergency session of the Concordant Security Council had been going for 6 hours now. The large view screen at the front of the chamber showed real-time footage from the colony world of New Harmony. Thousands of Hive sovereignty combat proxies were advancing across the plains toward the main settlement. Behind them, transport ships were landing more troops every hour. Grand Admiral Jolak stood before the council, his silver mantis-like form rigid with stress. "The situation is grave. The Hive has deployed a new generation of combat proxies that our defensive algorithms cannot counter effectively. They appear to have studied our tactics extensively." On the screen, a line of concordant defense robots fired energy weapons at the approaching Hive proxies. The energy beams struck invisible barriers that flickered blue for a moment, then disappeared. "As you can see," continued the Admiral, "they have developed shielding specifically calibrated to our standard weapons frequencies. Our combat proxies are attempting to recalibrate, but the Hive units are adapting faster than we can respond." Counselor Zanvri's translucent tentacles curled tightly against her glass-like body. "What about the civilian population of New Harmony? There are over 3 million beings in that colony." "Evacuation is underway," Zolak replied. "But at current rates we estimate only 30% will be able to leave before the Hive forces reach the main settlement." The council chamber erupted in anxious chatter. Representatives from all 27 species spoke at once, their voices rising in fear and confusion. Many of them had citizens living on New Harmony. Kevin Daniels, Earth's military attaché, sat quietly at the back of the chamber. He was a stocky man with a weathered face and short gray hair. He had spent 30 years in Earth's special forces before joining the diplomatic corps. Now he watched as the alien representatives struggled to comprehend what was happening. For 8,000 years, the Concordant had enjoyed relative peace. When conflicts did arise, they were settled by combat proxies fighting other combat proxies, according to established protocols. No civilian populations had been directly threatened in living memory. The Hive sovereignty had changed the rules. Their combat proxies weren't following the expected patterns. They weren't fighting fair. Kevin stood up and made his way to the central speaking platform. He wasn't scheduled to address the council, but no one tried to stop him. "Counselors," he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. The chamber gradually fell silent. "I've been watching your defensive efforts, and I believe I understand the problem." Grand Admiral Jolak turned to face him. "Please explain." Attaché Daniels. "Your combat proxies are programmed to follow optimal combat algorithms," Kevin said. "They make the most logical decisions based on available data. But the Hive has studied these algorithms. They know exactly what your proxies will do in any given situation." On the screen, another line of concordant defenders fell to the advancing Hive proxies. "They can predict every move your machines will make," Kevin continued, "because machines, no matter how advanced, follow patterns, and patterns can be analyzed and countered." "What do you suggest?" asked Counselor Trell Knox, the small being with 6 eyes and golden fur. Kevin took a deep breath. Let us help. Humans don't fight like your machines. We're unpredictable. We take risks. We improvise. The council chamber went quiet. Kevin could feel the tension in the air. You want to send human soldiers to New Harmony? Asked Grand Admiral Jolak slowly. Yes, Kevin said simply. Combat proxies fight combat proxies in predictable ways. But humans, we're unpredictable. We've been fighting each other and overcoming impossible odds for thousands of years. Counselor Zanvri's tentacles rippled in distress. You would risk your people's lives? For a colony that isn't even yours? That's what allies do, Kevin replied. Earth has joined the Concordat. Your problems are our problems now. The grand view screen switched to show another area of New Harmony. A group of civilian transports was trying to take off from a landing field. Hive proxies were closing in quickly. If they reached the field before the ships could launch, thousands would die. We don't have time for a lengthy debate, Kevin said, pointing to the screen. Those people need help now. Grand Marshal Krev, the massive being with stone-like skin, stood up. I support the humans' proposal. Our standard tactics are failing. We must try something the enemy won't expect. A murmur ran through the council. The Grand Marshal rarely offered opinions, and never so directly. Earth has a rapid response force ready to deploy, Kevin added. The 1st Interstellar Marine Division is on standby. They can reach New Harmony in 12 hours. Admiral Vreen, the tall amphibian, looked troubled. 12 hours may be too late. For many of the civilians. We are also prepared to send in special forces by fast transport, Kevin said. They could be on the ground in 4 hours to begin evacuation assistance and defensive operations. The council's leadership huddle formed a circle, speaking in hushed tones. Kevin waited. On the screen, the Hive proxies continued their advance. Concordat defensive units fell back in perfect, predictable patterns and were destroyed, just as predictably. Finally, Grand Admiral Zolak turned to face the council. The leadership has reached a decision. Given the unprecedented nature of this attack and the immediate threat to civilian populations, we are authorizing the deployment of human military forces to New Harmony. Kevin nodded. I'll give the order, immediately. As he left the chamber to contact Earth Command, he heard the discussions continuing behind him. Some representatives were expressing shock at the decision. Others seemed relieved that something different was being tried. 3 hours later, Kevin stood in the Council's operations center, watching as the 1st Human Special Forces team landed on New Harmony. 60 men and women in combat armor moved quickly from their transport, spreading out to secure the landing zone. The Concordat officers in the operations center stared at the screens in fascination. Instead of moving in perfect formation like combat proxies, the humans spread out irregularly. Some took positions behind cover. Others moved forward in short bursts. 2 soldiers carried a civilian with an injured leg toward the waiting transport. They move so chaotically, said a Concordat tactical officer. There's no pattern to their deployment. That's the point, Kevin replied. The Hive has learned to predict your combat proxies. They can't predict humans. On another screen, a squad of human soldiers set up an ambush along a route the Hive proxies were using. Instead of engaging with direct fire as the Concordat units did, the humans planted explosives, then withdrew to covered positions. When the Hive units passed through the area, the explosives detonated. The blast didn't destroy the proxies, but it disrupted their shields momentarily. The humans immediately opened fire, targeting the temporarily vulnerable machines with precision. 8 Hive proxies went down before the others could respond. Remarkable, said Grand Admiral Zolak, who had joined them in the operations center. They identified a weakness we hadn't seen. Humans are good at finding vulnerabilities, Kevin said. It's how we survived on Earth. As they watched, more Special Forces teams landed across New Harmony. The evacuation of civilians accelerated as the human soldiers secured additional landing fields and created safe corridors. Reports came in from across the colony. Human soldiers were engaging hive proxies using guerrilla tactics, hitting vulnerable points, then withdrawing before the machines could adapt. "It's working," said Admiral Vreen in amazement. "They're actually slowing the hive advance." "This is just the beginning," Kevin replied. "Wait until the main force arrives." Colonel Maria Foster stood on a small hill overlooking the main settlement of New Harmony. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landscape. Through her binoculars, she could see the enemy positions. Thousands of hive combat proxies arranged, in perfect formation at the edge of the colony. Behind her, transport ships were landing in a constant stream, bringing in soldiers from the 1st Interstellar Marine Division. Men and women in combat armor moved quickly to their assigned positions, digging trenches, setting up weapons emplacements, and preparing defensive barriers. "They're expecting robots to fight robots," Maria told the officers gathered around her. "They're not expecting flesh and blood, instinct and emotion, determination and grit." Major Frank Harris nodded. He was a tall man with dark skin and serious eyes. "Our scouts report that the hive proxies have adapted to all standard concordate defensive protocols, but they've never faced humans before." "Exactly," Maria said. "And that gives us an advantage." She turned to face the gathered officers. "We have 12 hours before the main hive force advances. I want every squad to understand their mission. We're not just here to fight. We're here to show the galaxy what humans can do." As the officers dispersed to brief their troops, Maria walked down to where a group of concordate observers had set up their monitoring station. The aliens watched with obvious fascination as the human soldiers prepared for battle. Admiral Vreen, the tall blue amphibian, approached her. "Colonel Foster, your methods are most unusual. Your soldiers are not positioning themselves according to any combat algorithm I recognize." Maria smiled. "That's because we're not following algorithms, Admiral. We're adapting to the terrain and the situation. Each squad leader is making decisions based on their training and experience." "Fascinating," the Admiral said. "But how do you maintain coordination without a central tactical program?" "Communication, training, and trust," Maria replied. "Each soldier knows their job and trusts their comrades to do theirs." The Admiral blinked his large eyes slowly. "I must admit I was skeptical when your Special Forces teams first arrived, but they have achieved remarkable results. They've evacuated over 60% of the civilian population in just 8 hours. That's what happens when you send people who care about saving lives," Maria said. "Machines calculate acceptable losses. Humans try to save everyone." Across the colony, human ingenuity was on full display. Sergeant Alan Cooper led his squad through a network of sewage tunnels that ran beneath the colony. The tunnels were narrow and smelled terrible, but they provided a perfect route to emerge behind enemy lines. "Everybody check your gear," Alan said as they splashed through ankle-deep water. "We're going to set up position in that communication hub on the east side. From there we can disrupt their coordination." Private Olivia Watson moved alongside him, carrying a backpack full of improvised devices. She had been a chemical engineer before joining the Marines, and she had a talent for making useful things from local materials. "I've got something special for their sensors," she said, patting her backpack. "These compounds should create enough electromagnetic interference to blind them temporarily." On the western edge of the colony, Lieutenant Gerald Hayes and his technical team had captured a damaged hive proxy. They worked quickly to understand its systems, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. "Look at this," Gerald said, pointing to a component in the proxy's central processing unit. "They're using a power cycling sequence to maintain their shields. There's a half-second vulnerability every 40 seconds. He immediately sent this information to all human forces via their secure communication channel. Within minutes, every squad knew exactly when to time their attacks for maximum effectiveness. As the sun began to set, the hive forces started to move. Thousands of combat proxies advanced toward the colony in perfect, synchronized lines. They moved with mechanical precision, their weapons charging as they approached the human defensive positions. Colonel Maria Foster watched from her command post. "All units, hold position until they reach the outer marker. Remember your training." These aren't invincible machines, they're just tools built by another species. And every tool has a weakness. The Hive proxies reached the first line of defenses. They expected to encounter the predictable resistance of concordant combat robots. Instead, they found an apparently empty defensive line. Their sensors detected no combat units in the immediate area. The proxies advanced cautiously. When the center of their formation reached the middle of the defensive zone, the ground beneath them erupted. Human engineers had buried hundreds of explosive charges in a pattern designed to create maximum confusion, not maximum damage. As the explosions threw dust and debris into the air, human snipers opened fire from hidden positions on the surrounding hills. They didn't aim for the heavily armored bodies of the proxies. They targeted the sensor arrays and communication nodes, using the weaknesses identified by Lieutenant Hayes' team. "Fire at will," Maria called over the comm channel. "Hit them, during the shield cycle." Across the battlefield, human soldiers timed their shots to coincide with the half-second vulnerability in the Hive shields. Dozens of proxies fell in the first volley. The Hive units attempted to adapt, changing their shield cycles. But human observers noticed the change immediately and updated their firing patterns. From his position behind enemy lines, Sergeant Cooper's squad activated Olivia's electromagnetic devices. Suddenly, a third of the Hive proxies lost sensor capabilities, their coordination disrupted. "It's working," Alan reported over the comm. "They're confused and trying to re-establish their network." The concordant observers watched in stunned silence as the human forces implemented tactic after tactic that no combat algorithm would have devised. Soldiers used the terrain in unexpected ways. They set traps and ambushes. They targeted specific vulnerabilities rather than attempting to overcome the proxy's main defenses. A squad of Marines even managed to capture several intact Hive units by using electromagnetic pulses to disable them temporarily. These captured units provided even more data that Lieutenant Hayes and his team could use to identify weaknesses. As night fell, the Hive advance had been completely halted. Their perfect formations were broken, their coordination disrupted. Hundreds of disabled proxies littered the battlefield. Admiral Vreen approached Colonel Foster at her command post. "This is remarkable," he said. "The Hive forces have never been stopped so effectively." Maria nodded. "This is just the beginning. Now that we understand their systems better, we can target our attacks more precisely. Your soldiers have accomplished more in 12 hours than our combat proxies did in 3 days," the Admiral admitted. "I see now what you meant about human adaptability." Maria looked out over the battlefield where her troops were regrouping, treating the wounded and preparing for the next phase of the battle. "Machines follow programming," she said. "Humans follow their hearts. When we have something worth fighting for, there's no stopping us." By morning, reports were coming in from other concordant worlds under attack. The Hive Sovereignty's offensive had stalled across multiple fronts, as human tactics were shared with concordant defensive forces. For the first time since the attack began, the tide was turning, and across the galaxy the news was spreading. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. 6 months had passed since the Battle of New Harmony. In that time, the war against the Hive Sovereignty had transformed completely. Human forces, working alongside concordant combat proxies, had pushed the Hive back across all fronts. Now, the Hive leadership had sent a message requesting peace talks. Admiral Beth Young of Earth Fleet Command stood at the center of the Concordant Security Council chamber. The room was packed with representatives from all 27 member species, plus observers from a dozen non-aligned worlds who had come to witness this historic moment. Beth was a tall woman with short blonde hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades in command positions. Her blue uniform was decorated with the new medal created by the Concordant, the Star of New Harmony, awarded to all human forces who had fought in that pivotal battle. "The Human Integration Initiative has exceeded all expectations," Beth told the assembled representatives. "By combining human tactical thinking with concordant technology, we've created a defense system that the Hive could not overcome." On the large view screen behind her, footage played showing the new hybrid combat units. Concordant combat proxies, redesigned with input from human military experts, moved with less predictable patterns. Some were now directly controlled by human operators who could override standard algorithms when unexpected situations arose. We propose formalizing this approach, Beth continued. Concordant combat proxies provide the perfect platform, but human operators provide the unpredictability and adaptability that pure AIs lack. Counselor Zanvri, who had once been horrified by human military practices, raised a translucent tentacle to speak. Admiral Young, 6 months ago I would have considered your proposal unthinkable, but the results speak for themselves. The counselor gestured to a report displayed on each representative's datapad. Casualty rates among human forces have been 82% lower than our initial projections, and effectiveness rates against hive forces have been nearly 300% higher than our combat proxies achieved alone. Grand Admiral Zolak stepped forward. I would like to add that several concordant species have started their own volunteer programs, inspired by human example. This was true. Representatives from a dozen species that had been particularly impressed by human combat effectiveness had begun training programs where their own citizens, volunteers only, learned to operate combat platforms directly rather than through autonomous systems. The Trellix Collective has 50 pilot operators now training with modified combat proxies, said a representative of the avian species. Early results are very promising. Beth nodded. This is exactly the kind of cooperation we hope to foster. Each species brings different strengths to the battlefield. From his seat at the back of the chamber, Kevin Daniels watched with satisfaction. The former military attaché had been promoted to brigadier general and now served as Earth's military liaison to the Concordat. Beside him sat Commander Eli Wright, who had first introduced humanity's different approach to warfare to the galactic community. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? Kevin asked quietly. Eli shook his head. Never. I thought they'd consider us barbarians forever. Times change, Kevin replied, especially when you face a common enemy. At the front of the chamber, Beth was answering questions about the human training methods that had proven so effective against the hive. The key is flexibility, she explained. We train our people to think, not just follow procedures, to look for weaknesses, to adapt to changing situations, to improvise when necessary. But how do you teach this? Asked a representative from a silicon-based species. Our combat algorithms are designed to find optimal solutions. That's the difference, Beth said. Sometimes the optimal solution on paper isn't the best solution in reality. Humans understand this intuitively. We're not always logical, and that unpredictability becomes our strength. Grand Marshal Krev, the massive being with stone-like skin, rose from his seat. The chamber went silent. The marshal rarely spoke, and when he did, everyone listened. I have served the Concordat for 700 years, he said, his deep voice filling the chamber. In that time I have seen many changes, but none so profound as what these humans have taught us. He looked around the room slowly, his glowing red eyes meeting the gaze of each council member. For 8,000 years, we believed that removing ourselves from combat was the path to civilization, he continued. We built machines to fight our battles while we remained safe and distant. But the humans have shown us something important, that sometimes being willing to risk yourself for what you believe in is exactly what makes victory possible. The chamber was completely silent as the marshal's words sank in. Perhaps, he said, turning to look at Counselor Zanvri, there is wisdom in being willing to fight for what you believe in with your own hands, not just with machines you control from a distance. Zanvri's tentacles rippled, and what humans had learned was a sign of deep thought. I believe you may be right, Marshal, though I hope we never forget the terrible cost of the morning wars that led us to develop combat proxies in the first place. We will not forget, Beth assured her. Humans understand the cost of war better than most. That's why we fight so hard to protect what matters to us. As the council session concluded, Sam Norton, Earth's new ambassador to the Concordat, found himself approached by a young diplomat from the Thalosian Dominion. The diplomat was tall and slender with pale green skin and elongated fingers. Ambassador Norton, the diplomat said hesitantly, I have been studying human expressions since your species joined the Concordat. Oh? Sam replied with a friendly smile. Find any favorites? Yes, the diplomat said. Is it true that humans have a saying? Skin in the game? Sam nodded. We do. It means that when you have something personal at risk, you're more committed to making things work. That is what fascinates me, the diplomat said thoughtfully. Your species seems to believe that risk and commitment are connected. They are, for us, Sam explained. It's not just about being willing to fight. It's about being invested in the outcome. Perhaps that is what we have been missing all these centuries, the diplomat said quietly. Perhaps that is why we nearly lost everything when the hive attacked. As they talked, news was spreading throughout Concordat space. The hive's sovereignty had officially surrendered, agreeing to withdraw from all conquered territories and pay reparations to affected worlds. The war that had threatened to overwhelm the Concordat was over. In the operations center adjacent to the council chamber, Colonel Maria Foster, now General Foster, studied the final battle reports with Admiral Vreen. The amphibian officer had become a strong supporter of human military methods after witnessing them firsthand on New Harmony. It is still difficult to believe, Vreen said, gesturing to the reports. 6 months ago, the hive seemed unstoppable. Now they sue for peace. Maria smiled. That's what happens when you change the rules of the game. They were prepared to fight machines. They weren't prepared to fight humans. And now? Vreen asked. What happens now that the war is over? Maria looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Now we make sure this doesn't happen again. We train together, we learn from each other, and we remember that sometimes the oldest ways of fighting, with courage, determination, and the will to protect what matters, are still the most effective. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, word continued to spread about the Deathworlders who had arrived barehanded in the greatest war in 8 millennia and changed everything.